setback for the Modi government as India slips to the 100th spot in the Global Hunger Index comprising of 119 developing countries. India is in fact lagging behind North Korea and even Iraq on the chart. Congress Vice President Rahul Gandhi takes a jibe at Prime Minister Modi, blaming the government for its misplaced priorities.
An all-out political battle breaks out over the Election Commission's delay in announcing Gujarat poll dates. The main opposition party, Congress, slams the BJP of arm-twisting the poll panel to hold the announcement until the Prime Minister's rally in the state on the 16th of this month. The BJP hits back, says desperation is driving the opposition to paranoia.
In a big development, the Supreme Court comes down heavily on the Modi government over the handling of the Rohingya refugees, says the centre cannot turn a blind eye to the plight of young children and women who are coming to India seeking help. Also bars any deportation of the Rohingya refugees until it gives a final verdict on the 21st of next month.
The cracker crackdown is here to stay. The country's top court refuses to lift the ban on sale of firecrackers in the Delhi NCR region, rejecting a plea for modifications in its earlier order. The apex court says it is pained to hear that some people are trying to give a communal colour to the order.
It's a mixed bag from Reliance Industries. Second quarter profit jumped 7% on strong revenues. Refining margins at $12 a barrel are a tad below expectations. In a big positive, the telecom business, Relgeo, turns EBITDA positive.
Diwali comes early on Dalal Street. The Nifty hits 10,180 for the first time as investors cheer the twin treat. In the macro front, Sensex jumps 250 points with metals and financials leading from the front. Expectations of better corporate earnings in this sector also aid the investor sentiment.
The merger of Tata Tele's mobile services business will not have any negative impact on Bharti Airtel's bottom line, says the company's vice chairman Rajan Mittal. In an exclusive chat with Your Channel, he says consolidation is good for the industry, even as investors give a thumbs up to the deal, pushing up the stock 7% in trade today.
And growth pangs in the first quarter is just a blip, and the Indian economy is expected to do much better in the coming months, recovering from the twin shock of the note ban and the GST switch. That's the verdict from ace economists Kenneth Rogoff and Geeta Gopinath, who throw their weight behind the Modi government's bold reforms. That's also coming up on the show. India has a serious hunger problem and ranks 100th among 119 developing countries, lagging behind North Korea and even Iraq. In fact, only Afghanistan and Pakistan fare worse than us. It's a shame that we're the second largest food producer in the world, and yet we also have the second highest population of undernourished people. It's disturbing to report that more than 1/5 of Indian children under 5 weigh too little for their height, and over a third are too short for their weight and age. Statistics are startling, and if these don't set us thinking, wonder what will.
Indeed. So what has got us here? Apathy, corruption, ignorance, or perhaps all of these? There is no dearth of schemes, so is it the efficacy of implementation that's perhaps at fault? We are the youngest nation in the world. Our demographic dividend is perhaps envious, and yet 38.4% of our children are stunted. This isn't just another issue we are looking to debate in the India development debate this evening. As a mother, as a woman, but most of all as an Indian, it pains me to discuss this dismal ranking, because we are not discussing just another statistic or just any other index. We are discussing the health of our people, the fate and future of our children this evening. Joining us on the show this evening, a very, very special panel. Purnima Menon, Senior Research Fellow, IFPRI. We've got Arvind Nirmani, Press and Chintan Live. Viraj Patnaik, Right to Food activist. We've got MS Swaminathan, Founder Chairman of MS Swaminathan Research Foundation and the father of India's Green Revolution. Thanks each one of you for being with us on the show this evening. Dr. Menon, I'm going to start with you because you in some sense have authored a lot of what we're going to debate today. India is the second largest food producer in the world, and yet we house the second largest malnourished population as well. I mean, besides being ironical, it's perhaps most shameful.
That's right. The key issue to remember here, though, is malnutrition unfortunately isn't just driven by food or food production. It's driven, especially malnutrition among children, is driven by many different factors. And child malnutrition forms a critical part of the Global Hunger Index, because we really want countries to focus in on the kinds of things that affect children most deeply. So what's really important to remember here is that children's nutritional status, which is captured in two indicators in the Global Hunger Index, is driven by the status of women, it's driven by the status of poverty, of sanitation, because malnutrition, as it's manifested in the human body, is related both to the nutrients that go in, it relates to how and where children are, how healthy children are born, which reflects the state of their mothers, and it also reflects what's going on in terms of infections and illnesses. And you know, I think if you really take a hard look at the data on these types of things, you'll see that we have a long way to go in changing the kinds of determinants of malnutrition, especially among children. I do want to say also, though, you know, while some of the report is shocking, and partly it's because of the ranks and things like that, it's also quite important to celebrate the fact that there has been progress over time. Stunting among children in India has reduced. Hunger in terms of absolute undernourishment has reduced. India's GHI scores have declined over time, which is a good thing. The ranks of something like India's rank on the Global Hunger Index is driven by India's progress, but it's also driven by the fact that many other countries have made much more rapid progress on addressing one of the key drivers of India's hunger index score, which is the child malnutrition numbers. So yeah, I hope that's helpful in interpreting it for now. It's, you know, it's shocking, but it's also not all bad news.
Okay, it's not all that bad, even though relative to other countries, our performance is pretty abysmal. Dr. Swaminathan, let me come to you. You know, there is no dearth of schemes, and this report also talks about the fact that there is no dearth of schemes aimed at boosting, you know, nutrition levels for children. You know, and we've got so many of them. You know, the Pradhan Mantri, you know, Matru Vandana Yojana, the ICDS scheme. Of course, you know, we can just go on rattle midday schemes, etc., etc. What do you think explains such an abysmal score?
All of our schemes and efforts, we are still rather poor in terms of abolishing malnutrition. As the hunger index shows, our position is not very enviable position. We are in a bad situation. Sometimes we are described as a nation with grain mountains and hungry millions. This is what the Food Security Act tried to change. In other words, so long as there are grain mountains, everyone in this country should have enough calories. But you know, our problem of these indices, as well as the problem of estimating hunger, is a very complex one, because hunger has both food and non-food dimensions. For example, in our country, in many parts of the country, the safe drinking water, clean drinking water, sanitation, primary health care, nutritional literacy, these are much more important than the availability of calories. So what we have to do in this matter is how to bring about the various departments of government, various non-government organizations, various private sector institutions into one integrated anti-hunger or hunger elimination group of people, because it is clear from our experience, ICDS, another good example. In spite of ICDS, the child mortality and what we call the cognitive abilities of the child is affected when during the first 1,000 days, if the nutrition is not good. Therefore, the first 1,000 days have become now very important in terms of child's nutrition. Special attention will have to be given, and that can be given only to the mother. The children of that age will not go to an Anganwadi and so on. I feel, having watched this for many years and having thought in the 60s that we'll overcome the problem of hunger and food availability are two different things. Hunger has both food and non-food dimension. Yes.
Right. Right. So just hold your thoughts there, because I do want to broad base this debate, and I think the point that you made, despite the Food Security Act and all of that, Dr. Vermani, let me throw this to you. You know, the Food Security Act ensured food for all. It guaranteed food for all. And yet we keep falling in this global health hunger index. I agree with both, you know, Dr. Swaminathan and Dr. Menon, that yes, you know, this isn't just about lack of food. But let me also ask you on the Food Security Act per se, what has gone wrong there? Is it the efficacy of implementation? Is it the efficacy of the program itself, where there is so much emphasis on rice and wheat and not perhaps so much on proteins and millets and pulses and things like that? I mean, what has gone wrong? A program like this was supposed to give India the freedom from hunger. It really hasn't.
Yes, so I disagree with the conventional wisdom on this issue completely. I think the talk of hunger, food, cereals, poverty is totally misleading. I showed in two papers, one in 2007, the other in 2012, that India, the children below 3 and below 5 years of age suffer from wasting and stunting, largely because sanitation related issues. This was both a cross state study, one, the second one was inter country study, and both of them gave the same results, that India was an outlier on the issue of child stunting, wasting, etc., mainly 90% because of the whole sanitation issue. So the key thing which will solve this problem is the Swachh Bharat mission. I think it was absolutely very important. A lot of people nitpicked about it in the beginning. I was one of the few to support it purely based on my research. So I think it's misleading to talk of it in the context of Food Act. I oppose the Food Act for the same reason, because my analysis does not show that any of this is due to either poverty or a cereals deficiency. There are about 1 to 2% hungry people in this country, which is a lot, which is like a couple of tens of millions, but you won't find them by the Food Act. They are in remote areas, they may be disabled people, they may be old people. So I think the proper analysis of this issue, breaking it down into components, is critical to solving it. That is why I have often criticized, as I said, I am sorry, it is not a personal issue, but I have often criticized this hunger index because it misleads. The issue is not hunger, it is sanitation. The issue is not poverty. We found that in the top bracket of income, there was child malnutrition of the kind we were just talking about. So I think it is very important to define the problem carefully, because otherwise you do not find solutions. You just get misleading things like the Food Security Act.
Let's get in a word from Mr. Viraj Patnaik, who's been an activist for the right to food as well. Do you agree with Dr. Virmani there? And now, in light of the sort of progress or lack of progress we've made in the global hunger index, what's your own assessment of the situation? What do you ascribe this abysmal situation to? Is it a case of apathy? Is it a case of poor implementation of policy? Or is it a case of, like Dr. Virmani says, misplaced priorities?
So first, let me just state what is not being stated upfront, is that we have actually slipped in our ranking from 97 to 100. So whatever this government may claim about being pro-poor and in terms of the schemes, the fact is that it has come down from 97 to 100 in 1 year. Now coming to Dr. Virmani's point, he is partly correct. He is partly correct in that the fact that sanitation plays a very important role in reducing wasting and stunting. But if you look at the data carefully, for every 10% increase or reduction in open defecation, that is, as you achieve the goal of total sanitation, every 10% increase leads to a 0.7% reduction to stunting. So even if you had 100% sanitation, you just have an impact of about less than 10%, which is why Bangladesh, which compares well to India, because the stunting rates are not very different. Bangladesh has made a lot of progress, yet their open defecation rates are close to zero. So they have achieved total sanitation, but stunting comparably has not come down to zero. In terms of the criticism of the report, yes, the title hunger has a different connotation, But as Dr. Swaminathan very eloquently put it, nutrition has dimensions which are both linked to food and not to food. What has to be analyzed from the report is the fact that it does not talk about hunger. So where is Dr. Veermani's point about it being misleading? The indicators are hard indicators. They are on stunting, they are on wasting, they are on underweight children, and they are on child malnutrition. All of this data is taken from Government of India's National Family Health Survey, which came out last year. So I don't see really a big disconnect. One can argue that the title may be misleading in terms of projecting it as an issue of hunger, where in reality it is. But if one reads the report, it is based on these hard indicators. So I don't see a disconnect. As one of the people who was involved in the drafting of the National Food Security Act, along with Professor M.S. Swaminathan, when the National Advisory Council, where Professor Swaminathan and others were members, drafted it, we had tried very hard to include sanitation into the National Food Security Act, as well as other dimensions of nutrition. But unfortunately, that did not happen. That doesn't mean that food is not an important variable in India anymore. If you look at the NFH's data, only 9.6%, that is 10%, less than 10% of children in this country are able to get an adequate diet when they shift from breastfeeding to complementary feeding. So that to me is a great indicator that the inadequacy of diets, which is not linked to calories, but quality of diets, remains a very critical issue. We have failed miserably in the implementation of the National Food Security Act, and I can talk about that in a later segment.
Fair point indeed. We'll talk about all of that in just a bit, but I think a point has been made about the welfare schemes. And Purnima Menon, Dr. Purnima Menon, I'm going to come to you on this. You know, is this a case of not enough? I mean, I know your report also talks about the fact that there needs to be a greater thrust, a greater push towards welfare schemes. But is this really a case of a lack of resources for welfare schemes? Because what has really happened in the last 1.5 to 2 years really is that because of the 14th Finance Commission, a greater devolution is happening to the states, and a lot of the central government welfare schemes now rest with the states, and one doesn't know how they're performing, what the states are really doing with this. So for a lot of reasons, the center isn't the last port of call as far as these welfare schemes are concerned. Do you believe that is one of the reasons why we are where we are?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. You know, huge responsibility in India lies with the states to recognize the problem of malnutrition, of hunger, of undernourishment, whatever we call it. The fact is, it is a problem. And a huge responsibility lies with the states to examine the problem within their context and to really think about, you know, how they're going to address what are some of the major determinants. And in this previous segment, what we've talked about is that for whether it's stunting or wasting, the determinants matter. You know, I think sanitation is important. There's other analysis that shows that it's gender-related issues. To me, as a nutritionist, it really is a combination of these, and that combination of factors varies by state, which means that every state needs to diagnose their problem and say, what is it that I can do with the welfare schemes or other actions in, you know, in sort of their governance ambit, and for them to think about how much they need to spend, how they need to direct resources to some of the districts that are doing particularly badly, or, you know, that need additional support. I mean, to me, the beauty of the new data from India in particular is that we can now drill down to the level of the district. And what you see is, you know, it varies. For example, something like child stunting varies from 12% in the best performing districts to 65% in the worst performing districts. And so we are really in a position where we can now drill down, take a hard look at what the data is telling us, take a look at what it's saying about determinants, and then you have to connect that back to the welfare schemes and think about which things you can actually change with the welfare schemes and which things really are about either societal norms or social inequality and need different types of levers, you know, whether it's community mobilization or thinking about, you know, the kinds of economic transformation that you need. You really have to think about multiple levers. This is not simply about the National Food Security Act. It is about deploying multiple policy levers, spending the money that needs to be spent, because these are really important social issues.
Multiple levers that you need to look at. But Dr. Swaminathan, you know, let's talk about the elephant in the room. Is this a case of apathy? The point that Mr. Patnaik was making as well. Is this a case of apathy across government? And, you know, not to fix political blame, you know, a multi-sectoral program was decided to address maternal and child undernutrition in 200 selected districts in the year 2013. That hasn't been rolled out and has now been subsumed in the proposed new national mission. Is this a case of apathy, bureaucratic apathy, the fact that the system has failed? Dr. Swaminathan, if you can hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah, I was asking you if this is a case of...
Shall I you know, if I can respond, first of all, I think the problem is not lack of resources, either financial or knowledge of what needs to be done. Already, I think in the last few minutes, members have explained what are the problems, what are the solutions. But how to do this, how do you understand? I think the hunger itself, unless agriculture, nutrition and health come together, you will find it very difficult in villages and rural India to overcome what we call hunger, because hunger has both the food and non-food dimension. The Food Security Act covered a little bit only the calorie deficiency, 5 kilograms of grain per month and so on. The calorie deficiency is only one part. The more important deficiencies in our country are the problems relating to protein hunger and also what is called hidden hunger caused by micronutrient deficiencies, iron, iodine, zinc, vitamin A, vitamin B12 and so on. These are really serious from the childhood onwards. Lack of iron or iodine or vitamin A or vitamin B12 in the diet cause a lot of problems. Therefore, once again I want to say that if you want to overcome hunger in its totality, its total sense, we'll have to involve the local community. We have a program called Community Hunger Fighters, chosen by the panchayats, 2 or 3 women and 2 or 3 men, and they have been trained what are the problems. And you can see a great change. Now we have created Panchayat Raj institutions, but we are not using them for community mobilization. Those developing countries, including Brazil and so on, have made tremendous progress both because of technology and public policy. They have come together and the local communities have participated. So I think, in my view, the time has come for us not to go on analyzing what the problem is, whether the deficiency is due to this cause. Sanitation is extremely important and primary health care is very important, but more important is how to bring all these together.
So convergence of a very different kind, get sanitation, get primary health care and get availability of food altogether to ensure that India doesn't stay hungry anymore. But Dr. Virmani, you touched upon the point earlier about sanitation, and you believe that a lot of it has to do with sanitation and access to proper, clean water and sanitation really. Given the success of the Swachh Bharat mission, would you look at this whole hunger debate through the prism of an outcome-based approach? Do you believe that's more effective, that works better?
Absolutely. But I want to touch on this point made, 10% change, 0.7. The whole reason for focusing on a Swachh Bharat type campaign was that there were innumerable reports that people were making toilets and putting, I even remember somebody saying they use it as a temple, as a prayer room. So, getting these numbers, I don't know where the numbers are from to say that the sanitation has no effect. I have hard papers, 2 papers which show that it does. The second point I want to make is I do not agree. Again, proper analysis is very important. So, what I found besides that was that the real problem is the gender differential in health. So, by talking about general hunger and general food deficiency, you don't get anywhere. What you have to do is correct the bias. The problem is that the women's health has been neglected, and there is a bias in the food between males and females. So this thing about just going and doing it, it does not happen like that. I'm sorry to say, I've been involved in these programs for 30 years. So just saying just do it does not work. You have to identify the precise problem and address it head on if you want to solve it. So for example, education, the gender differential in education was attacked and has been narrowed. That is not true of the health differential. So certainly you got to do something about the iron deficiency in women, etc. So without identifying the real problem, just waving our hands, doing right to food, right to this, right to that, I'm sorry, I disagree completely. And I'm not just speaking off the bat. I have dealt with these issues for 30 years. And what I always found was this general thing, that the solutions are always driven by the moral imperative rather than hard data analysis. And it's very important to do that analysis and see what works and what doesn't. Incidentally, I also found that ICDS seem to have some positive effect in certain states.
Right. Okay, Biraj Patnaik, you want to comment on that, and I want to add another question, which is, at a more macro level, do you believe we have an appropriate governance mechanism? It's quite clear that probably the governance mechanism is weak when it comes to nutrition. Do you believe that we have an appropriate governance mechanism to establish nutrition as a centerpiece of national development agenda? We've seen that in the case of sanitation, and there has been some progress, like Dr. Virmani pointed out, and you can't dispute that. Do we have an appropriate governance mechanism to make this a centerpiece of national development agenda?
Yeah. No, absolutely not. On the contrary, we have a lot of governance confusion because nutrition falls between two stools, between two ministries. Women and Child Ministry, according to the rules of business, and the Ministry of Health. The Ministry of Water and Sanitation is nowhere in the picture. So therefore, in terms of governance, we have always argued that we have a very good model, which is the Conselho in Brazil, where an elected body led by the president with the presence of every single minister makes a national nutrition plan every 2 years and then reviews that plan in a meeting that's chaired by the President of the Republic, has the ministers and has elected councillors from every municipal body in the country, every rural area in the country. So that is a governance mechanism that we had also wanted to replicate in the National Food Security Act. Unfortunately, it did not happen. Women and Child Development Department in India remains the poorest and the worst administered department, both in terms of the political leadership as well as the bureaucratic leadership. No self-respecting bureaucrat would want to be posted in that department, and that is the reality. It's a den of corruption. It remains so. As Supreme Court commissioners, we were not even able to dislodge a contractor from Uttar Pradesh like Ponti Chadha after almost 6-7 years of trying. So what does that tell you about governance? Now, on Dr. Virmani's point, I never said that sanitation has no impact. In fact, I pointed out that it does have an impact, but not as a standalone solution. And the comparison in data between India and Bangladesh will tell us why it doesn't have a standalone impact. Now, I completely agree with him that we need to look at gender differentials to fix the problem. And not just gender differentials, we have to look at differentials between, for instance, for the scheduled castes and the scheduled tribes, where the data is very, very clear. They are from the poorest districts in the country. Access to healthcare, education, gender differential between scheduled castes and scheduled tribes across social sector indicators remain the worst. So yes, we need to target it, but targeting will not happen without political will. Now, we need a government that displays the political will that President Lula's government in Brazil did when they launched the Fome Zero program, where they could bring in 30-40 programs under one governance umbrella led by the president of the country and a national resolve to eliminate malnutrition, which they did very, very successfully. And the great thing about the Brazilian example is that they have managed to reduce stunting and wasting in equal proportion across the rich and poor parts of the country. So it's addressed inequality very well as well.
Okay, Biraj Pathak, hold your thoughts there. I want to get back to Purnima Menon. And Purnima, Dr. Swaminathan spoke of a very different kind of convergence. He said there needs to be a convergence of not just government agencies, but NGOs, private sector participation as well. I'm going to talk to you about another kind of convergence. Convergence at the level of districts, at the level of blocks, maybe villages, of different departments of the government. Why should the sanitation department work in silos, or for that matter, health and welfare work in another silos, and then of course the food department comes in? A convergence of that kind, I'm presuming, will make it a better success and will make the delivery far more effective.
So, I mean, this really builds on Biraj's point, right, which is that we need different things in different departments to come together, and that this needs to happen. I mean, to me, the ultimate convergence is whether these things reach communities and households. You know, do they reach women and children in the first 1,000 days of life? That is your ultimate marker of convergence, not whether people are sitting and having meetings together from different departments. It's important that people have those meetings, but they have to lead to action within those sectors that really reaches all of these services to people on the ground. Again, you know, we have administrative setups where you have leadership at the district level. You know, I think it's important that we take a look at the new nutrition strategy that the government has laid out. For the first time, it does bring 3 sectors together, including sanitation. It requires a joint review by district magistrate, district collectors, but I think we have to, you know, really engage with this process and say, look, how do you make sure that those things happen, that they're paying attention to the right kinds of things in each of the districts, that you're right, that, you know, you don't have Swachh Bharat operating in one district and health department trying to strengthen programs for women and children in the first 1,000 days in another district. But there is a 113 district focus, which is promising, but, you know, India is a 640 district country, and stunting, for example, is really high in close to 400 districts. So we do need sort of national leadership. We need to take this to many, many more districts than just those currently articulated in the mission. And political and high level commitments and monitoring is really, really important. You know, nutrition is too important to be left to just one department. It's just too important.
Okay, fair enough. But Dr. Virmani, you know, since Dr. Menon spoke about this the Niti Aayog national strategy on the issue of nutrition, I want to speak about that specific paper that the Niti Aayog put out. You know, the Niti Aayog Vision 2022, which, you know, promises a Kuposhan Mukt Bharat with clear monitorable outcomes, and there are quite a few of them, but specifically reduction in percentage of underweight children below the age of 5, right now 35.7%, to be brought down to 20.7%, reduction in anemia for, you know, kids from the age group of 6 to 59 months to be brought down from 58.4% to 19.5%. Are these the kind of outcome-based policy approach? Is that what we need? Do these outcomes look deliverable? You know, Dr. Menon also spoke about the fact that they've identified 113 districts as a focused approach. Do you think at least now there is a realization of the distance that needs to be traveled for us to, improve our rankings in an index like this?
So, you know, there is a fundamental dilemma between people wanting the union government to operate at the ground level, that is a top-down approach, and what the communities actually need, and saying you have to do it district by district. There is a fundamental thing. It's not a new issue. One has grappled with it, as I said, for 25 years. There's always these two things, but they are totally contradictory, because what happens is in each district there will be slightly different priorities. In some cases it may be public education, in some cases it may be public health, like communicable diseases and so on. So you cannot, you know, that was the whole criticism of planning, that the government decides at the top of the planning commission and then starts a program, and then everybody focuses on that particular program, no matter what the district or the block level is needed. So the only and the only thing one had worked out, in fact I was charged with working out how to deal with this fundamental problem. So one is information. So the problems, and of course that we tried the district level planning, etc., nothing seems to work. So there are two elements which I came to the conclusion. One is information. So basically, if the local people somehow can put information, for example, on the web or their local thing, so we know what is their priority. So some system of doing priorities. And second was decentralization, that the share, as you know, the share of devolution has gone up and the state has to devolve more. That part is not happening. And the third is monitoring of results, the point you just mentioned, that if we put the results for district wise or whatever, I still remember this program in Odisha where you could go to a particular village and say what has happened to sanitation. It was all on the web. So this was three. You have to generate the demands or the what the priorities are at the local level. You got to generate the data and you have to put it up in a monitorable form. Now, if all these three stages can be accomplished, as you said, the NITI is trying to do it. I think it's going to be a tremendously difficult task, but if they are able to do it, if people are able to see, okay, you had these targets, how much have you achieved, then the pressure will come more on the administration, which are, as you said, silo based, and that's not changing. There'll be more pressure to actually achieve something. There'll be people both at the bottom level and the media, etc., who can monitor it. So there's hope for it. Yeah.
Okay, Kuposhan Mukt Bharat, and there are very clear monitorable outcomes like Sandeep pointed out there. Dr. Swaminathan, if I may bring this to your notice, reduction in percentage of underweight children, whether it's reduction in anemia in children, whether it's reduction in anemia in women with reproductive capacity, some of the targets that have been put in place are indeed of a very, very tall nature, very tall order to be done by 2022. Do you believe these are feasible? And do you also believe that it's all right to put these high targets? At least you're going to get somewhere close to them, even if you won't achieve them.
If I may say, the right to food is already there in the Act. Not complete right to food, but partially at least. Entitlements have been mentioned in the Food Security Act. I again want to repeat that what we require are coalitions for nutrition security involving both the public and private sector from down from the village upwards. I don't agree that a few districts alone, they may have high burden districts, should be chosen for attention. We need the whole country to be healthy, and that means everyone should know something about the fundamental fact that nutrition is basic to a good life, to a happy life, to a healthy life. That kind of nutrition security awareness has not yet come. Nutrition is really has come to mean calories. So much of food, so many kilograms, and so on. But as is clear from this debate, both food and non-food factors are important. In many cases, non-food factors like sanitation, drinking water. I have traveled extensively. Drinking water is a real problem in many cases.
Right.
And therefore, that's why I said you need coalitions for nutrition security.
Okay, we need a coalition for nutrition security. Biraj Patak, I know you want to come in, but what's your own view on these targets? Because like Dr. Menon pointed out, this seems like like some sort of a credible policy approach is now in place. A committee of secretaries under the NITI Aayog CEO has been set up. The Women and Child Development Ministry has been made the nodal ministry for implementing the nutrition mission. There's a Prime Minister's task force as well, and these targets have been set. What's your own assessment on the policy framework that's now being put in place to address this challenge?
No. Well, I'm not very optimistic about this policy framework because it's, governance has been reduced to all television, no vision in this country. And not just with this government, but on nutrition, this has been going on for a long time. Now, the National Nutrition Council, the Prime Minister's Nutrition Council, hasn't met in 3 years. So what are we talking about? What is the point in having a council that doesn't meet? In the UPA government in 10 years, I think it met only twice. And one of them was based on a prompt that I had personally made to the Prime Minister. And this was constituted at during Mr. Vajpayee's time. So therefore, I think the big gap is, as Professor Swaminathan pointed out, that convergence has been a buzzword. I was involved in design, implementing and planning a program for the Delhi government on convergence, where we did precisely this, but we could not sustain it simply because after the government changed, the political vested interest did not allow it to happen, because ministries work in silos, and therefore the interest groups operate in silos, and unless you break them, this convergence is not possible. I disagree that a 100 district approach or a limited approach of geographical targeting is going to deal with this problem. I completely agree with Professor Swaminathan on that. I would much rather go with the approach that Dr. Virmani suggested, which is, but at a more holistic scale, looking at every single district, finding out where the problem is and sorting it out. And if you look at the overall factors, gender very key, caste is very, very key, as well as the status of the tribal population, indigenous groups, very key. These are the three key factors, and we must reduce the differentials on gender, health and education, access to land and so on. Resources are a problem. If farmers, who constitute a bulk of this country's workforce, do not get a minimum support price that is respectable, where are we going to get the rural incomes to bring diversity in diets? I mean, the Swaminathan Committee recommendations, which had designed a simple formula for giving adequate incomes to farmers, has been languishing for years and years and years now. Every television debate we talk about it. Every time in Parliament we have a session where token respect is paid to the issue of MSP, yet no one has the courage to implement it. So I think the vision is just not there. A nutrition mission without a budget for monitoring or implementation, WCD has got it 1/5 or 1/6 of the budget that they had asked for overall for monitoring it. It's not going to have the impact that we need.
Purnima Menon, if I may bring this to your notice, how does one intend to control large-scale leakages? I mean, these are big programs, and yet there is a lot of leakage that keeps happening. And then, if you look at the other side of the debate, a lot of people say, is cash transfer really, the magic bullet? Can that perhaps work better, both in terms of improving levels of sanitation as well as ensuring more food, which brings down levels of hunger? How are you going to respond to that?
Yeah, so I think it's really important that we come out and say there is no magic bullet. Okay, when you have a problem that has that is caused by multiple factors, there's no magic bullet. It's important to experiment with policy to find the solutions that are right for the context. And in some contexts, it may well be that cash is the right thing. And in some contexts, certainly food is the right thing. And this is what our research world over on cash transfer shows. They're not magic bullets for nutrition unless it's in the right context and unless you have accompanying health and nutrition services. So there's certain things that we just can't escape, which is that, basic services need to be in place. There needs to be a basic notion of ensuring equity. Like Biraj said, gender is critical. Poverty is really, really important. Poor people have enormous constraints on what they can do in their lives. They have enormous time constraints, money constraints. And so I'm very uncomfortable with us saying that poverty isn't important either for hunger or for malnutrition. It is, but again, solving poverty alone won't give us what we need in terms of nutrition. A cash transfer can alleviate poverty. It will not deliver nutrition outcomes unless it's also accompanied by adequate health and nutrition interventions that help people understand what healthy choices mean when you have extra money in your pockets. The issue of leakage is a really important one. It's important for any kind of program, not just for the ICDS or the PDS. But I think we can look now within India. I really do like that we have some, critical, like really great global examples like Brazil and Peru and things like that. But I think we also have some really nice examples within India where improvements in implementation, improvements in paying attention to reaching scale of programs in terms of solving implementation bottlenecks. These exist within India. These exist within the same policy framework. It's really interesting to me that 3 states that are very different, Chhattisgarh, Arunachal Pradesh, and Gujarat, are at the top in terms of the magnitude of stunting reduction that they've seen, which means that each of them have done a very different set of things. And we really need to now look into this. This is part of the diagnostic exercise that has to happen. Right. It's not, a magic bullet. You can't just say cash for everyone in India or food for everyone in India. Okay. It has to be tailored to context.
Okay, there is no magic bullet. Closing comments, Dr. Virmani, I'm going to get it from you and then go to Biraj Patnaik as well. One is sort of, the conventional wisdom has always been that economic growth is the antidote for all of this. The way to beat these issues is fast, rapid economic growth. China was a classic case of a country that grew rapidly when it comes to its economy, and then in turn it saw a lot of these issues, crucial social issues getting fixed as well. Is that conventional wisdom also something that needs to be questioned, that rapid economic growth alone is not enough to solve some of these social problems?
See, one of the things we haven't discussed is information and knowledge. In the West, they taught basic nutrition, taught about germs. How many schools are there in India, tell me, where the children learn these things? So does the mother know, does the child know that germs, playing in the dirt will harm them? So public education. But on your broader question, I don't know, everybody talks economics because everybody knows it, but there's a fundamental distinction in real economics, that is between public goods and private goods. We have neglected public goods. I am willing to debate anybody on this issue for an hour or more or however much time. Public goods, externalities, only the government can do. The income will not solve those problems. For example, vaccination, it's a public good. Government has to vaccinate. We've just heard about chikungunya and 3 other things which happened in Gorakhpur. That's a government's job. It's a public good. So you cannot solve public goods by just giving income. Government has to solve the public goods. What you can solve is, if poverty is the issue, you can solve it by giving money. Okay? The way we have done it, 30% of what you spend or less goes to, and again, I'm not talking just from public this thing. I have actually done research on this issue. 70% is leaked out. So there are things which are private, which people use money to do themselves. They can buy food. It's only in the remote areas there is no, there may be only one shop, but in 90% of the areas in India there are shops for food. If they have the money, they will not buy the food. I don't buy that at all. So the distinction, there are many things which are private, which can be solved by growth and by income transfers. There are public goods and externalities which cannot be solved. The government has to solve them.
Right. I agree with some of what you say, and I don't think we have to look very further away to China, which actually reduced its undernourished people by about 15.5 crore rupees, whereas we could just do 1.5 crore in the period between 1992 to now. But look at closer home Nepal and what Nepal has been able to achieve between 2001 to 2011. But one of the reasons why it has been able to do that is because of higher household incomes. Biraj Patnaik, are you going to dispute the fact that growth is, after all, the antidote to all of this? Growth is going to bring about higher wealth, education, maternal education, the entire value chain really, and which is why we believe that is growth the only antidote to all of this? And does that explain why China fared how it did?
No, on the contrary, no, absolutely not. In fact, on the contrary, on this I would agree completely with Professor Virmani. We need to put growth in its place. Growth is important. A rise in incomes is important. But the data worldwide shows that there is not a corresponding reduction in malnutrition or any other social sector indicators with an increase in growth. So therefore, countries like Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal, just in our neighborhood, which have much lower growth rates, much lower economies are not really comparable, just by investing in the public sector, in public goods, in universal education, universal health care, increasing access to public goods, they have been able to overtake India in the last 30 years. You know, India was on the top of these rankings 30 years ago insofar as our neighborhood is concerned. And today, only Afghanistan and Pakistan are ahead of us, and on many indicators, even Pakistan has overtaken us. Even the evidence within India, if you look at the difference between NFHS 3 and NFHS 4, two states, Gujarat and Punjab, which had amongst the highest growth rates, also saw an actual increase in the number of malnourished children. You know, that is the evidence within India. If you compare states that have grown well, what is the impact of malnutrition, whereas states which have reduced stunting or wasting, or there's no corresponding, there is no direct correlation between growth and the improvement in social sector indicators. On the other hand, what Purnima said was absolutely correct. Many states have invested in different ways in their public sectors. Chhattisgarh did it through the public distribution system and midday meals and other investments. Other states have tried out different things, and that seems to have worked. So I think we need to focus on what has worked for India within the states, what are the lessons that other states can learn, and how do we replicate it. But we do need to change our development philosophy, because over the last 30 years, our development philosophy has transitioned from self-reliance to reliance, and therefore this touching faith that growth driven by the private sector is going to deliver the goods. We need a serious rethink on that.
All right, we're completely out of time. That's a fascinating debate. I can't thank all of you enough, Dr. Swaminathan, Dr. Purnima Menon, Mr. Biraj Patnaik, and Dr. Arvind Virmani for coming in on that perspective. India's rapid economic growth and growing global heft counts for little when the nation ranks 100 in the Global Hunger Index. It's about time that nutrition occupies the center stage of a national development agenda.
Indeed, the Global Hunger Index report is a wake-up call for the country. How can we make our peace with the fact that 21% of our children suffer from wasting, which simply means they have no weight for their height. For India to unlock its much talked about demographic dividend, this is perhaps the most compelling policy imperative. Thanks very much for being with us on the show tonight.